You know what's a match made in heaven? Regulatory technology and content marketing. Yep. Why? For three main reasons. First of all, if you work for RegTech, regulatory technology, your target audience is compliance professionals whose roles heavily rely on staying up to date with the news, the latest regulations and laws. And by that nature, that makes them avid consumers of content. Second of all, compliance professionals get a lot of said content from Google when doing their research, which means there's a clear channel for you to reach them. Third of all, a lot of content in this industry is subpar, as with many other industries. It's surface level, generic, and doesn't really go to the level of depth that compliance professionals really need. And it means that there's a clear way to stand out as a company by creating precise, accurate, high quality content. And to be honest, I'll add a fourth reason, which is that compliance isn't optional. You're selling software that isn't a nice to have, it's a necessity for all companies, and that puts you in a much better position to sell. All this means is that content marketing and SEO, as we'll see in this episode, can work really well if you work for a RegTech company. In this episode, I'm talking to Marketing Director at ComplyAdvantage, Will Thompson. ComplyAdvantage is an AI-driven fraud and AML risk detection software company. And Will has led their content marketing efforts for the past 3 years to absolutely incredible levels. In this episode, we dive deep into exactly what he's done and the kind of results that they've managed to get. We talk about, for example, how in 2024, they actually did fewer webinars and pieces of content, but actually managed to get over double the number of qualified opportunities. Or how SEO is their number one lead generating channel, and how they use dream data and storytelling to explain the value of content to the whole team. If you're a content nerd, this episode is for you. I had a lot of fun diving into the specifics with Will, and I really appreciate how open he was and willing to share what he's found works and doesn't work for him. You're listening to the Fintech Marketing Lab podcast. I'm Araminta from Mint Studios, a content marketing agency specialized in the fintech space. And this podcast is where we experiment, explore, and break down how fintech marketing actually works in practice. Each episode, I talk with top fintech marketers about what they're testing, what they're learning, and how they're pushing the boundaries of brand, strategy, and team building. With that, let's get into today's episode. Let's just start at the beginning. So if you could introduce yourself for the recording and also tell us a little bit, what is your day-to-day look like as a director of content communications at ComplyAdvantage?
Yes, I'm Will Thompson. I'm the Director of Content and Communications at ComplyAdvantage. So my day-to-day is very varied. Working in a scale-up, you tend to cover quite a broad remit, which I actually really enjoy. So I do a lot around kind of managing and reviewing our content program. So reviewing content that's going out, working with internal subject matter experts and some external ones as well. I also look after our PR program. So some of what I'm doing is also thinking about our kind of PR activities and media opportunities that we have coming up and arranging interviews. And I look after our design and social media teams as well. So there's also a little bit of project management around the design side and working with my social media manager on all the kind of exciting work we have going on there. So yeah, very broad. Obviously also working with our CMO on making sure that all the areas of the marketing team that I cover reflect the priorities of the company. So very broad, very exciting. Yeah.
Keeps you busy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is the role of content and Comply's like marketing approach? And maybe you can give a bit of context by explaining kind of the other marketing activities that you focus on and what the role content plays.
Yeah, and content's always been very central to ComplyAdvantage's market. I can't even claim full credit for that. Even prior to me joining, I've been here nearly 4 years. And so even before that, it's been a large part of what we do. I think initially, because there are a lot of vendors in our space, there are some kind of more established or legacy providers. There are some more kind of disruptor or other scale, but there's a lot of companies that do similar but different. One of the challenges we have is how do we establish credibility? How do we establish that we have knowledge in the space beyond the products that we offer? The kind of early teams at ComplyAdvantage understood that the content marketing is a really strong way of establishing that credibility. One of the things we always try and do with customers is show that we're a partner, not just a vendor. You know, customer success and our support teams are a big part of what we offer from a product perspective. Being able to demonstrate that with really credible content is part of what we've always done as a company and something I've tried to kind of expand while I've been here. So in terms of the sort of wider marketing strategy, we do build a lot of our campaigns around a sort of central content piece, whether that's a white paper, whether that's a kind of series of webinars. What we've really been trying to do more recently is kind of think more from a campaign than a content perspective. I think one of the challenges I've had as director of content is actually sometimes I've been saying, cool, that's great, but we actually think more about the campaign. What are the sort of run-up activities? How are we following up afterwards with sales? Do we have the right paid budget for this? I almost think we've had challenges, which is a good challenge for me to have, where people are so invested in content that sometimes we default to, oh, let's create a piece of content for X or Y. And I'm the one kind of saying, oh, let's row it back. Like, what's the objective of this? What role does it play? And I've got some data points I'm sure we'll get into on actually how we've done less in some cases and achieved better results. So some of it's actually been rowing back the amount that we do and thinking more about what's the strategy around it, all of that kind of thing. So in terms of channels, we rely very heavily on things like LinkedIn and Google Ads from a paid perspective. LinkedIn in particular is a really great resource. We do a few events, particularly kind of the big ones in our space. So things like ACAMs and some of the kind of banking and payments events. But yeah, a lot of it is very, very kind of content, very digital driven for sure.
Yeah, like what you said about making sure that it's part of a campaign. Could you expand a bit on that? So do you try and do like X number of campaigns per year and they're all going to have, I mean, they're probably all going to be a bit different, but do you try and aim for X amount of content per campaign? Or is it more like whenever there's a new piece of content, you're like, let's first make sure it's part of a campaign. So what is your thinking there around campaigns?
Yes, yeah. And I think this kind of gets into the content strategy of we try and have 3 to 4 core global pieces a year because we do operate across Asia Pacific, EMEA, and the US. So we do kind of have a global focus once a quarter. Often that will relate to commercial objectives. In Q1, we always do our annual State of the Year report based on a proprietary survey we run every year, our State of Financial Crime report, which is always our top asset for the year. And then kind of for Q2, 3, 4 onwards, we will still be running versions of that, but also thinking about payments, banking, insurance, big sectors for us. Those core global things are always mapped to the commercial priorities for the organization. Where are we selling? Where do we have the best product market fit? There may be more tactical pieces at a regional level that are more specific. So one thing we find works really well for us is talking about regulations. Regulations are always changing in our space. What we try and do is get ahead of new regulations. So the European Union just published a huge amount of new AML, anti-money laundering, kind of financial crime regulation, a massive playbook. We had kind of experts review that before it was finalized and actually say, look, this is what the draft is looking like. This is how it's taking shape. These are things you can do and get ahead of these things actually going live. So those are things we think work well at a regional level. But yeah, we do try and have a kind of quarterly global focus and then some of those more regional pieces. The reason for that, I think, is it's all very well putting a piece of content out there, getting, a few thousand email addresses, but then so what, right? So one of the things I've been working with the digital team on is we now have a consistent global email nurture that everyone goes into when they download that content. Some of that is general and is more of our sort of general thought leadership. There are different flows for different products. So we try and measure in that email flow and obviously based on other activities people are doing, what are the products that we think they're most interested in? And then we'll send them to case studies and things like that that are most relevant to what they're interested in. Obviously, we then do things like looking at webinars, for example, that may be a way of accelerating or further measuring intent. So a lot of what we're trying to do is, great, we've got your contact information. It's then really thinking about whether it's email, webinars, whether it's retargeted ads, what can we do to understand better what that person wants? And then, is it great they just go to our weekly newsletter? Is it, great we get them to sales? Is it sending them more product content? And obviously if you have too much content, it's very difficult to do that, right? Because you're just building up these massive lists of people. So that's really been our focus, is that alignment with sales on how do we build our lead scoring model. And our digital team have done a lot of work on improving the model, making sure we're passing leads over at the right point. Content is a part of it, but it's that bigger picture, which is where we've really matured in the last couple of years.
Nice. Yeah, I want to get into that whole thing you said about sales because that's really interesting. You've worked at Ingenico and you're very familiar with the fintech space. How do you feel like content for RegTech or the regulatory environment is a little bit different to fintech or payments in general?
Yeah, the difference that we have, I guess, is that, what we do is all, for a lot of the companies we speak to, it's a regulatory requirement. So you're starting out from a different baseline. We're often not having to convince them. We don't need to convince them why they should be doing anti-money laundering. It's a legal requirement. They'll be fined and go to prison if they don't do it. So we don't have to convince them of that. we have to, and I think so. It is about being a bit more detailed. There are lots of vendors talking at a very high level, and anyone can create a chat GPT blog on the top 5 things you need to know about X regulation or Y regulation. But I think the big challenge we have is there's a real need for quite in-depth subject matter expertise to write good content, because otherwise, and you see this with writers that are a bit more experienced in the space, they write to almost inform themselves. And they'll say screening for political persons is a really key part of a compliance program. Anyone in compliance would know that. We kind of need to jump one step ahead. So I think, it's about really understanding the detail and understanding that we have a very informed audience that doesn't need the kind of classic convincing that this is something they need to do. It's actually great. Well, what's the value of what you do? What are you telling me that's which is a fun challenge, I think.
That's really interesting. And I totally agree. Like, to be honest, even in fintech in general, there's a lot of like writers learning on the go and very beginner topics, and in payments as well. Like, you don't need to try and convince them or just say, okay, what is a direct debit? You don't need to, you can just skip that part. So no, I totally agree. And I was asking this because we've just started working with a compliance company as well. And what I found so cool or interesting was what you said. I think, first of all, it's a need. So there's no even like question behind whether they need some support or not. And then also it's really complex, and it's actually getting more complex every year, regulation. And so SEO works really well because, and there's so many keywords. Like, we started working with this company and there are like, maybe not thousands, but like so much more than maybe your payment orchestration company where it's super niche. In RegTech, it was like, there's so many, and they're also really good, like really good keywords to rank for. I don't know if you've seen that as well, but it's like, wow, there's so much opportunity, basically what I'm saying, in SEO and content.
For sure, yeah. And I think that creates another layer to the content challenge, right? Is there are all these keywords, and obviously you've got to thread that needle of getting those keywords into the articles to ensure that you rank, but in a way that doesn't dilute the detail and the value and the richness of the content, which is the classic SEO writer challenge, right? And doing that dance with your SEO execs around getting the keywords right and the right number of backlinks and making sure that they're useful links, and it adds another dimension to the challenge. And also that you're obviously competing with, we've seen some of the algorithm updates, to Google kind of put us understandably below regulators or below official sources, and that's completely reasonable. But it creates a challenge when you're trying to be as high up on Google as possible.
So let's go back to content strategy. You said that a big part is campaigns. What does content strategy look like at Comply? Is campaigns just a part of that, or is it mainly just campaigns? What does that look like?
Yeah, we kind of separate it really into the kind of always on, which is our SEO program, our newsletter, all those kind of different elements, content to support events, content we create for partners like UK Finance, or all of that is the sort of always on machine that is kind of always running. And then the campaigns have quite a high bar, because we get a lot of our inbound, when we think about like inbound demo requests on our website, we think about conversions on content. A lot of our sort of baseline monthly metrics are hit by the always on content. So then we're always thinking, okay, what value beyond that does a campaign add? And what is the benefit of doing that relative to investing that, very limited time that we have in more SEO content? Because if we're going to write a white paper that there's no paid advertising spend for, or isn't in a segment that sales can support, we're better to spend that writer time refreshing or building out 5 new pieces of search content, because we know we can build inbound demo traffic from that. So we set quite a high bar in terms of making sure that, it's a segment that aligns with the company's priorities. It's a segment where we have sales buy-in, we have a good product story. So that's really how we think about it. It's sort of the baseline is all the always on, and then the campaigns are this kind of additive piece where we do say, we work with our regional marketing teams and say, great, what are the revenue goals you want to hit for this segment? Why are we doing this segment? What are we selling? What's the value? And they always have that information, but it's about us all going through that exercise and the writers understanding actually the end goals in terms of, is this a segment where, this content is trying to accelerate pipeline we already have? Is this something where we're completely new and we're trying to build our contact base? All of that for me is kind of critical context if you're going to write, even to write thought leadership. What level of knowledge does the audience have about us, and what are we trying to get out of them?
Yeah. And it sounds like your campaigns are really closely tied to revenue goals then. Is that the case, or is it like over on an annual basis, or really per campaign?
Yes. So we use a platform called Dream Data, which kind of aggregates all of our information from things like Google, LinkedIn, HubSpot, Salesforce. It pulls all of that information together in a really useful way. So we can look at, and HubSpot also has some great kind of data on this around things like influence revenue and customers. So yeah, we do look at influence revenue as one of our goals, even for thought leadership. Obviously, it's a little bit difficult because our sales cycles are, 18, 24 months for some companies at the larger end. So it's always got quite a long tail. But it is something that we do measure, particularly relative to what did a similar campaign achieve in the year before, right? That's a great way of looking at, okay, 12 months, you can compare 6 months to 6 months or 12 months to 12 months and look at influence pipeline. And obviously we break our deals down into kind of different stages, and we have internal language for that. But obviously broadly, your stage one is your business development meeting. Your stage two is you've had that initial meeting and there's probably some kind of dollar value attached to an opportunity. Those are really the stages we would measure a lot of the thought leadership content on, is, how many of those people that have downloaded that content have got to that second stage where we've had a conversation and we've got a sense of what the deal opportunity is. And I think that's probably the right level to go to in terms of making sure the advertising targeting is correct. But that is absolutely something we look at. And also qualitatively, we have a sales one Slack channel, so everyone can see when new deals are coming through, and you can see in there the lead sources. And so sometimes we can then actually go into Dream Data and look at a specific customer's journey and say, we've had some deals around organic search, for example, and you can see customers bouncing around between maybe the homepage and a product page, and then maybe they downloaded a white paper, and then maybe they disappeared for 6 months because they were just doing some exploratory work, and then they got budget approved, and then they came back and went straight to a demo. So we can actually see those journeys and how they're not that linear. It's not just, white paper, BD call, sales call, deal sign. The qualitative is also really interesting, looking at how customers actually engage with the content and how it's not linear, because we as marketers always talk about that all the time, but it's really powerful for us as a marketing team kind of having that information.
I'm going to check out Dream Data. This sounds really cool, because I think the big benefit of what you're saying is that channel available to everyone, because then everyone can see the role of content and organic, right?
Yeah, it literally will say,
really cool.
Organic search or whatever the lead source is, it's there for everyone.
Yeah. Did you find that people were surprised at how many deals were from organic, more than they expected?
We've always had a really great partnership with sales, actually. And we've always had a lot of credit and kudos from our sales team around the value of the content. So it is very collaborative. And obviously we know that inbound, outbound is a bit of an oversimplification of how these things work, right? We know that outbound deals are going to be influenced by content, and inbound deals are obviously going to be influenced by the quality of the sales interaction. So it's always a partnership. And I think, as a company, we're very good at recognizing that we both need each other, and it's a kind of additive relationship.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I love how you can see in so much detail. Like, I was just talking to the head of brand communications at Pleo, and they just recently moved all their content onto HubSpot. And they, for the first time, they're getting insights that they'd never had before, and they were like completely blown away. And so, this is why I'm always pushing, like, get your tracking in place, because the level of insights is just fascinating. And I'm sure you've had insights where maybe if a person reads X number of pages or X number of pieces of content, they're, 60% more likely to convert. And that's just like fascinating, but also really interesting, because then you know what topics seem to convert better and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
So it's fascinating. Yeah. No, I love it.
I mean, we ran a webinar series last year as an example where, one of them, we had some very broad ones, and then we had one that was very kind of technical on ISO 20022, this payment standard. Super technical, had the lowest number of signups. And so if we just looked at signups, you would have said, I didn't do that well. But in terms of the influence value of the people that came through, it was the best performing one, even though it had maybe half the number of signups of some of the others. Super high quality, right? In terms of people that are a good product market fit for us and what we do. But if you just looked at the sign up numbers, you'd have said, oh, well, that was a waste of time. So it can completely change how you look at these things. And obviously for our executives who understandably want to see the value of what they're investing in, that's a much better metric to talk about as well.
No, I love that example. That's really good. And yeah, I totally agree. So just before we go into how you work with your sales teams, I'd love to hear how you get the inputs for your content strategy and for your campaign. So how do you make sure that you and your team is in touch with pain points, problems, how people are feeling in the industry? How do you have that workflow set up?
Yeah, so we have an in-house regulatory affairs team. So we have an expert in London and we have an expert in New York, and they're people that have been practitioners in the industry for decades. They sit in the company between product engineering. They do a lot of our PR work and content work. So they're our speakers at events. They talk to customers. So they're a really unique resource for us in that they understand where our products are going. They talk to our customers. They're connected to the industry. So they're a really useful resource, as well as directly from our sales leaders as well, in terms of what are we focusing on. So our regional marketing teams are very much kind of two sides of the same coin with our regional sales teams. And that gives us a real closeness to what those teams are doing without being kind of too driven by it. Right? I think there's always a temptation of, oh, wow, this regulation came out, let's do a whole thing around it. And then you kind of get off track with something. So yeah, it's very much collaborative kind of input.
Yeah, having that internal expert. And what do you talk to them like once a week, or how do you kind of keep that communication open?
Yeah, we try and do kind of quarterly sort of horizon setting sessions, particularly around PR and the media, but a lot of that will then inform what we're doing for content as well, for sure.
So yeah, the role of content in the sales cycle, but you've said that you're super collaborative with the sales team. So what does that kind of look like in practice? And also how have you, because this is the challenge that I hear very often, is that, yeah, the content team or the marketing team creates content for the sales team, but then they never use it. So how have you tried to avoid that? And how does that relationship look like so that the sales team is actually using your content and finds it really helpful?
Yeah, so I think part of it, as we talked about, is making sure that the leads we're passing over are the right quality and having that lead scoring model. A couple of years ago when I joined, it was very much more manual and sales were getting literally a spreadsheet of people. And I didn't know this till years later, but you look back and you see, oh my God, there were loads of great people on this list, but for whatever reason, no one called. And that's obviously a terrible process. If you're just downloading content, giving a spreadsheet of names to salespeople, that's obviously not a good process. So some of it is that lead scoring model, which obviously initially does reduce the amount of leads that sales are getting. And so you may get some pushback because salespeople just kind of want the list. But I think over time, we see that they see that quality is better. They see a better response rate. They see, ultimately more deals, more commission. That helps. I think other things are, making sure that they're bought into whatever the content is that we're doing. Getting them involved in content can be really helpful. So we use a webinar platform called Emmy, which is really fantastic. They have you can do webinars, but also they have these kind of follow-up tables afterwards. So, we always do a webinar and we'll say, great, we've got a table where our speakers are going to be, and you can join this kind of virtual table. And then we often have a demo table for the most relevant product where somebody in the sales team can walk them through how does the product work that relates to what we're talking about. And that way, people have that option to do that, but we're not forcing it on everyone that's on the webinar. We actually find those perform really, really well. And then you have a salesperson involved in the session and actually seeing feedback in real time. Some of it is making sure we brief our business development partners. So we've created emails and content that they can use to follow up with leads that attended, leads that didn't attend, and they've got different templates for those different things that they can send out and start a conversation and say, hey, I love this point in the webinar. What did you think? And then really, working with them, looking at the data after a campaign and saying, great, this is where we've done well. This is where the challenges are. What can we do together to reinforce that? Or to get more of those leads kind of through.
Yeah. No, I love what you're saying about the webinar. People turn up, but then how do you turn them into potential customers, basically? So that's really interesting the way you've approached that. And I imagine Araminta just manages that, makes that super easy to set up then.
Yes, yeah. And we manage them internally in terms of hosting and things like that. But yeah, you can run polls on there. There's a chat feature, which is really good. We find we get a lot of engagement in the chat. So yeah, it's been very successful.
And I imagine also they're probably webinar, you said yourself, you can repurpose that into other pieces of content, but I imagine it's also actually a good way to get an input in the sense that people from your team go to the webinar to learn more about current topics, and then also that feeds into the content strategy, I imagine.
Yes, they're great for our sales teams. And I think that's the other point on sales engagement. So we have our sales enablement kind of team have a platform called FlockJ, which is where we sort of host a lot of resources. So a lot of the content that we create also goes in there. So if there's a salesperson looking for a quick primer on a topic, they can search for it and find a white paper or find our content in there and use it to help them kind of stay on top of trends as well.
Yeah, so many cool tools. And I think often the challenge of maybe why salespeople don't use the content is because they don't have an easy way to access it or find it with just a couple of clicks. And so by making it super easy, I don't know how FlockJ works, but I imagine you just need to type in a specific word and then all your white papers and stuff will come up, and then they can really easily use that. Yeah.
And our sales enablement team can also set tasks in there. So if there are specific things we want them to read, it comes up as a task that week that they have to kind of log as completed. So there are ways of tracking,
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool.
Super priority as well. Yeah.
Nice. I'm going to check out. Now I want to talk a bit about SEO, because it is a topic that I love very much. And what you said before, which is SEO is kind of like that always on marketing activity that allows you to get a steady flow every month. So I'd love to hear a bit more about that. How have you approached SEO? And then tell us a bit about how the bottom of the funnel and what you've been experimenting with that and how it's working for you.
Yeah, so again, SEO is something that has always been a large part of our content strategy, even kind of predating my time here, which, when I joined in 2021 really helped because we had a good domain authority on the website. We had a lot of the kind of basics, covered a lot of what I call the what is content, the what is anti-money laundering, what is financial crime, what is this regulation. We've done a lot of that. So part of what I did when I joined was really make sure that we build that content out, make it as detailed as possible. Obviously, having some very high level content is good, but you're really only appealing to smaller fintechs rather than some of the bigger enterprise customers. So building that out, making sure we're logging when was the last time you reviewed this, when was the last time it was updated, to make sure we keep it refreshed. I've been building out our design team, so now we can create more graphics and visuals that go in those pieces. And then obviously we've also been looking at the journey through the site, right? So where do we then lead people to from those blogs? Because the bounce rates on those blogs were very high, which, on one level is natural. If somebody's answering a specific question, it's obviously not necessarily a problem if they leave, but does it make sense to link to a demo straight from a what is anti-money laundering article? Probably not. We're better to get them to put their contact information into a white paper, or we've actually been adding kind of little sort of non-invasive pop-ups around like sign up for our weekly newsletter, and that stuff works really well. But yeah, as you alluded to, we've been doing more with kind of bottom of funnel SEO and what that looks like. And that's been an interesting, I think, challenge for our whole team in terms of it's not as easy to find the right keywords, and it's not as easy to then map those keywords to what we do. So like one example is, we do risk scoring in our product. All the keywords around risk scoring and kind of AML risk scoring, so anti-money laundering risk scoring, which is fine. And that's how the industry talks about it. But we kind of talk about it in a more general sense. Well, we do it for financial crime risk that's more than AML. And so our product team say, well, that's not quite accurate. But we're saying, well, those are the keywords that have the volume, and that's what people are searching for. So we always have to kind of do this dance around how do we get that balance between making sure we properly represent what we do and also that we're capturing that search intent. But yeah, one of the things that we've found very well, which was an inspiration that came from a session that I know you presented on, was these kind of competitor comparison articles, and talking a bit about vendors in for sanction screening or top vendors for politically exposed person screening. So we have a kind of article series on that. We really do focus on us in those articles. Obviously, competitors talk about themselves in very different ways, and we could end up in a bit of a confusing people. But we talk a bit about our value. We summarize some of our competitors and some of the other companies people might want to look into. We have our G2, we're a kind of G2 leader in anti-money laundering. So we have our G2 quadrants featured on there. And those have been really impactful in terms of a bottom of funnel SEO and all of that. So it's an ongoing project. We're still doing more around our product capabilities and testing kind of different pieces there. But yeah, one of my goals has really been bringing that SEO piece down the funnel, and yeah, seeing the impact of that again, particularly because we can measure that influence revenue, right? An SEO exec is going to say, well, there's not much search volume around that. There's much more search volume around the what is AML, and that's their job. But we can create this content and say, well, sure, but the people coming to those pages are much higher value for retargeting, or they're going straight to demos. Then great, we can prove the value beyond just traffic to the site.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's really exciting to see that working, and exactly what you say. Like if you've got the HubSpot report set up properly, you can prove with actual numbers, like this content only gets 20 searches a month, but it's brought in 100K in business opportunity. Whereas the what is, which is kind of getting replaced by AI now, we can talk about that in a second, is getting traffic, but it's just traffic, really, not really business opportunities. So it's really great to hear that that's working. And what you said earlier about a keyword that doesn't describe exactly what you do, that happens so much. I call it damning demand, where someone's looking for X, and so you have to interrupt their search and actually say, yeah, I know you're looking for AML risk scoring, but actually we do so much more. And this is the beauty of content, is that you can make a case for that and explain why what you do is better. Whereas with Google Ads, you could argue you've only got you could do it with a landing page, I guess, but I think that with long form content, it's a little easier to say, actually, this is what you're missing out on. And this is where like damning demand is really where a lot of opportunity lies in SEO, targeting those incorrect keywords, which people are often scared to target because it's like not exactly what we do. But if you're able to convince leadership, then this is where often the opportunity is. So yeah, that's really exciting to see how it's evolving.
No, I love that. Yeah, I love that example.
Yeah, just briefly touching on AI because it is a very current topic. And I mean, I've got a couple of questions. One is like how you're implementing it in content creation, but also just on that about what is articles. I'm sure you started seeing those AI overviews and things that now basically Google, for anyone who doesn't know, Google is using AI to summarize a what is AML, for example, And that's like the first position. So it's kind of pushing everyone down a little bit. So have you found that has affected your traffic?
Yeah, we haven't seen a ton, I don't think, of immediate impact from that. And again, it's always difficult with Google algorithms being such a black box to know exactly what is making what impact. I think it's definitely something we're monitoring. Part of me is kind of optimistic in a way about that, because we get a lot of random traffic to those what is pages, or what are the 3 stages of money laundering. And my gut is that those are the first people that will drop off, right? If you're just a genuine, maybe you're watching Ozark and you're Googling the 3 stages of money laundering, you'll probably just read the AI summary and leave. Whereas somebody that, I don't know, is a compliance officer or the person tasked with compliance at a small fintech and maybe has been tasked with finding a vendor, but that's not their full-time job and they need to know a bit more and is actually looking for what vendors talk about, would be the people that would scroll past that and want to actually read something more in depth. So definitely one we should keep an eye on as that AI process evolves. I'm a little bit optimistic that maybe it will filter out some of the less valid traffic.
Yeah, no, that's a really good way to see it. Actually, I hadn't thought of that. And I think you're totally right. And also, we shouldn't forget that when you do expand on that, you do get the sources and stuff, so people can still click through that. So that's really interesting to hear. And I think I agree. I'm not pessimistic about it. It is just a new evolution in Google, and we just need to keep an eye on it and see what happens. But I agree with what you're saying for sure. And then in terms of like content creation or just marketing in general, have you tried to add AI into your process? What have you found works or doesn't work? Anything that you can share there?
We have a kind of traffic light process internally for AI, because these tools are evolving all the time. We can't just dismiss them once and say, oh, well, that's not no good for us. So we sort of have a red, amber, green approach. In the green kind of column is Grammarly, which is an incredible time save. We have the enterprise license for anyone that's a frontline writer, whether that's some of our sales colleagues or customer success and the marketing writers. I think people don't always think about Grammarly as AI, but it is. Obviously, it's an AI-based tool and it's incredibly useful. Our social media scheduling tool, not to throw another tool into the conversation, is Octopost, which is a fantastic B2B scheduling tool. And our social media manager manages we have all of our sales team, about 50 odd people are in there as sales advocates. So there's content that we put in there that they can create on their own channels. That has a really good Gen AI content tool for creating different versions of posts. So our social media manager will put our post in there and it will create another version of it. So it says the same thing, but in a different way. And that is actually a really useful tool, because it may be, once you've been staring at copy for a long time and you've written it your way, it can be hard to see how to do it another way, but you're giving them all the facts. So there's much less risk of factual inaccuracies. On the red side, we are very cautious. We would never use AI for full content creation, particularly in a space that's regulated. It can create things that are factually inaccurate. Even if it doesn't, if everyone's using the same tools, everyone's going to write the same article, and well, what's the thing that's distinctive? I think where we're in that middle ground, still experimenting, is some of the platforms that could help us. We've looked at things like ScaleNut and Writer and Jasper. We've had demos of a couple of those kind of tools that are somewhere in the middle that I think we could do more in terms of using Gen AI to help us create content outlines, make that side of the process a little bit more efficient. And we also had a demo tool called AnyWord, which I was quite impressed with, which it pulls things like LinkedIn data and performance data from our CRM and then optimizes based on what copy performs best. So it helps improve your conversions by using your performance data to improve your copy. And I could see, again, if we could get an enterprise license, something like that for sales teams when they're writing emails, that could be a real value add. So definitely more we're still looking at. It's one of the things on my list for 2025 budget planning, is getting one of those tools that takes us to that next level in terms of outlines, optimization, and particularly I think plugging in our data, because one of the challenges we've talked about being in a very niche space is a lot of these tools aren't going to say anything that's at the level of detail and that is accurate enough yet that is useful, but something that is based on our own data would be very powerful.
So are you saying like your own data is at the CRM, you're saying, or is it more like your tool? Okay. So like knowing what people are interested in, like plugging it into HubSpot and seeing what people are interested in, or data.
And even really small things like which keyword, just calling something a white paper or an ebook, those things can make big differences. One example we've seen kind of anecdotally is we see one of the lines we use in our ads a lot is this kind of AML roadmap. So build an AML roadmap. That is consistently one of our top performing ads is when we talk about roadmaps. And so a lot of our webinars, we use that roadmap language now. So we've been able to do a bit of that qualitatively. But if we had that AI plugin that was able to do that much more, maybe explore does better than discover, or sometimes it's really small linguistic changes. But if we had that just automatically optimizing in a dynamic way as things then change in our ads, that would be really interesting.
No, that's really cool. If anyone who's building an AI tool is listening, there's an idea for
Yeah.
another one, for another SaaS product. So another thing I want to ask is that you do a really great job in your LinkedIn newsletter, the briefing, and your
Yes.
webinars and your events to really stay on top of current topics. And I know you said you meet with your expert every quarter. Is that where you get all the inputs, or how else do you make sure that you're staying on top of everything and also producing at such a high rate? How does that work?
Yeah, the briefing's a really interesting example. So yeah, with that, we have a kind of a Slack channel for our team. We use that there are some great news aggregators out there in our space, like The Laundry is a really good one that collates a lot of news around fin crimes. And we use those. We go direct to regulator websites. So I think part of it is we have quite a focused brief in terms of what are we writing about in these stories. And a lot of it is what are the regulators saying directly, going on their press and news pages, and then those news aggregators. And then we have a kind of in the news Slack channel that the company as a whole, people are always kind of sharing content. So it's a bit of a mix of those things. But one of the things, the briefing is a good example of the kind of less is more approach. So we used to write, we try and do sort of 3 stories a week, roughly split one between each of our regions if there is enough news in each region. We used to do a full blog on each of those stories every week and what it meant. And then the newsletter would link to those 3 blogs. Obviously, that's massively time consuming. That's basically a day a week of a writer's time. Not an ideal journey for the user because they're, especially if they're viewing a newsletter on a mobile, they've got to click out to read each story and click back. What we see with a lot more with newspaper editorial newsletters is it's long form and it's all within the newsletter. You don't need to click out. And that's the goal of the newsletter, is not really for people to click out, right? We've already got their contact information. So we rebuilt the briefing as a kind of everything you can read is within the newsletter. So we do a short summary, a paragraph each of each story in the newsletter itself. We then syndicated that to LinkedIn. So it's something that goes out to our email database every week. But with the previous version, it was difficult to do on LinkedIn. So then our social media manager was like, oh, LinkedIn has this newsletter function. Let's try that. So now we have 17,500 subscribers on LinkedIn. We saw the open rates from the newsletter go from 20% to 35%. We've seen the click-through rates go from 1.5 to 2.5%. So we see massive improvements, and it probably takes about, half a day versus a day. So we've halved the time we spent on it. We did some design work. Our designers did a great job building a new template, but it's very simple. So we halved the time we spent on it. We've doubled the output by actually doing a bit less. We're not a news organization. We're not here to write in-depth reviews on all these stories. And we're much more disciplined about these are the kind of stories we focus on and what we're trying to achieve with it. Yeah, that discipline is kind of important, I think.
So are you saying that are you now doing the newsletter via LinkedIn and an email provider, or okay, so both at the same time?
It goes out through HubSpot, and then also, and it's our kind of always on touch point with anyone in our database every week, even if they're not in an email nurture, it keeps them in touch. And obviously we have links at the bottom to latest long form content or events and things.
Nice. And so this brings me on to my next topic, which was kind of any results that you can share or any metrics that you can share. What have you found has been like the success with this newsletter? I mean, you said already open rate has increased and all that, but from a more like a sales perspective, have you found that helps with, for example, as you said, you're on top of mind. So people are maybe more likely, you'll have more inbound, maybe 1 year later or something like that. So that, and then just general metrics that you can share.
Yeah, I mean, with the newsletter, again, we do also look at pipeline and, without going into specific numbers, the numbers of closed won deals, it's well in excess of 1 million in terms of, deals where people have read the newsletter, and the number of influence opportunities is significantly higher than that. So they're meaningful numbers of people that are engaged in the sales process and are kind of engaging with the newsletter. And yeah, I mean, in terms of other numbers on other things, continuing the less is more theme in it, I was like a bit of a contrarian as a content person going, make less content, but actually sometimes that is valuable. We do a kind of summer series of webinars each year. So sort of deliberately in that kind of downtime through the summer where people actually maybe do have a bit more time and some marketers are kind of pulling back. Last year, we did sort of 7 different topic-based sessions. This year, we did 4. We put a lot more time into the promotion. We cleaned up a lot of our database, so we did 4 instead of 7. We increased registrations by 60%. The average number by webinar increased 190%. The total viewing time for the webinars went from 23,000 hours to 64,000. It's very early for this summer for the pipeline, but the pipeline is already looking very strong in terms of influence pipeline. We even saw the attendee rates increase. I think it was about 34% watched them live last time, and it was over 50% this time, which is pretty great for people turning up on the scheduled time. And some of that is the content, optimizing the topics, optimizing the messaging, but it's also, making sure we're building out a high quality database, the advertising, the sales promotion. We use some influencers as well. So it's all of those different things. But again, less is more, right? It's actually how does content sit in that mix and what are all the different things that we're doing versus last year, I would say we were as mature as we are now on the content side, but we weren't as mature on the digital side. And that's the difference is we've been able to almost half the number of webinars we did, but 60 to 200% increase in some of the different metrics that we've actually achieved.
Can you share anything on like the topics specifically? How did you change the topics this year? Did you make them more like specific to regulations, or how did you make them like higher quality, you think, or more relevant?
The first one we did that had the highest number of registrations was around this roadmap piece. We'd seen that work very well in our ads. So if we had a guide, for example, on anti-money laundering in the EU, the ad that performed best was your roadmap to anti-money laundering in the European Union. And so we did a webinar on looking at the roadmap piece that's kind of forward-looking on the year ahead. Previously, we've done a bit of a review of the year so far, and I was going, well, actually, the stuff that's happened, why don't we try something that's looking ahead to the year ahead and key things in the year ahead? And so that roadmap piece performed very well. We focused on topics like sanctions, which are kind of very topical, but also an area that we have a good value in terms of our product. And we looked at kind of corruption and bribery as well, which is very topical with things like politically exposed persons, with all the elections that are going on this year. But again, is also an area where we have proprietary PEP data that is reviewed very well in the industry. So we really tried to find that sweet spot with topics that are, not where we can be controversial, but where we have a point of view, but also where we do have that kind of strong product value. And then good speakers is also really important. And that's where we leverage we always have someone from our regulatory affairs team there, but we leverage their networks, we leverage our influencers. That really helps as well, obviously, and customers as well.
Yeah, there's something about the word roadmap that is like so optimistic. I love that word. Like, I think it's just so like, this is a plan for the future. I like it. So it's interesting to hear that it's worked well, like from a copy side of things.
And avoiding B2B buzzwords, which anyone in my team will tell you is one of my pet hates. I almost wrote a list of them, but I mean, we all know what they are.
I've done that.
I'd love to see your list because anything
It's
about
long.
growing data volumes, anything about leveraging insights, we've all been on companies' websites or seen webinars where I have no idea what this is about. I think it was Anne Handley, the chief content officer, who her newsletter is really great. I think I get that every 2 weeks. So she said bad writing comes from bad thinking, or unclear writing comes from unclear thinking. And it's absolutely what that is. If you don't really know what you're trying to say, you say something waffly. And so, being really tight for webinars and for any content, right? Being really tight on what are we actually trying to say in this webinar is the best way to make sure that, they perform well.
To me, it's operational efficiency. That one comes up a lot, and I'm just like, no, it's not a good one. So I know we're at time. So just one question I wanted to ask you is, what are the pieces of content that you're proudest of at Comply?
I think definitely, and the obvious one for me to say is the state of financial crime, which is our kind of annual state of the industry report that we do. It's year on year, it's got stronger and stronger, and that's a really compelling piece that I love working on. We hit our download target. This year, we're at over 8,500 downloads this year for this year's report. We actually have double the kind of stage 2, so sort of that initial sales conversation, put a dollar value on an opportunity. The influence value that we've achieved this year is double what it was last year. And sign-ups are higher, but they're not double. So we've actually seen that real quality improvement. I think that's what I've loved with that is we've done more interactive web pages. We've done better webinars. The report itself has got better, but it's not twice as good as it was 2 years ago. The promotional piece is twice as good. The SEO impact is twice as good. The influence, it's all the stuff around it. And we have a ton of really exciting, fun stuff planned for next year. So stay tuned. That'll be really fun.
Nice.
I absolutely love that. And I think some of the webinars as well has been a really nice piece. I don't even really like the word webinar. I'd almost put that in the B2B buzzword bucket.
I agree.
I actually think there are lots of different types, and something we'll look to expand next year is thinking more about different kinds, whether it's a boot camp that's more hands-on on a product side, or is it a fireside chat where it's just 2 speakers and it's a bit more informal conversation. I think webinar is an overused term, right? That actually it's an event of some kind, and we should use event language to talk about webinars. It's just that it's online rather than in person. You wouldn't just call an event, right? You would say, oh, it's a fireside thing, it's a Q&A, it's a training, it's a workshop. You'd have a more specific term. So I think that for me is the area where we have the biggest growth potential as a team. And I'm excited to see what more we can do there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think the word webinar is you just hear that and you're like, oh, I don't want to attend that. But then actually you're right, because it's the word really. And now there's so many different and new ways, like since COVID, to do a virtual event that is so much more interesting. So I'm really excited to see what you come up with and how you try and reinvent this. There's a lot of opportunity. I think people want to do it, but just sitting 1 hour on your desk watching something maybe isn't. We need something more interactive. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what you put together, because I think there's a lot of potential innovation in that space.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Thanks for listening. You can find show notes and information about guests at www.mintcopywritingstudios.com/podcast. And finally, huge thanks to Orama.tv for producing this podcast. Thanks for listening, and see you at the next episode.